For 3 weeks, he watched her disappear every Tuesday and Thursday without explanation, returning with swollen eyes and shaking hands. She had started asking for small loans against her wages. Nothing alarming on its own, but patterns don't lie. So one evening, he did something he wasn't proud of. He followed her. And what he found in that quiet corridor changed him in ways no boardroom ever could. Welcome to our story. Before we continue, please like this video and subscribe to our channel, and tell us in the comments, where are you watching from? New York? London? Maybe South Africa or Jamaica? We want to know. Marcus Ellison was 44 years old and had the kind of life that looked perfect from the outside. He ran one of the fastest-growing logistics technology firms in Chicago, a company he had built from a rented desk in a shared office space into a global operation with offices on 3 continents. He noticed everything that mattered in his world: revenue trends, competitor movements, talent gaps, supply chain vulnerabilities. He could read a balance sheet the way other men read a newspaper, quickly, instinctively, and always finding what others missed. What he had never learned to read was the woman who had kept his home breathing for the past 17 years. Her name was Consolata. Everyone called her Connie. She had come to work for his family when his daughter Lily was barely 5 years old, referred by a family friend who said simply, "She is the most dependable person I have ever known." That turned out to be the most accurate job reference Marcus had ever received. When his wife Diane diagnosed with an aggressive autoimmune disease and spent 2 years moving between hospitals and specialist appointments, Connie held the household together with quiet, unshakable competence. When Diane passed, on a gray February morning 4 years ago, Connie was the one who sat with 8-year-old Lily through the nights when the grief was too large for a small child to carry alone. She read to her. She braided her hair. She made the soups and the warm breakfasts and the packed lunches that told a little girl, without words, that the world was still going to take care of her. Marcus had buried himself in work after Diane died, the way men who don't know how to grieve often do. He poured everything into Ellison Logistics, the expansion, the acquisitions, the relentless forward movement. And Connie was simply there, always there, making sure Lily still had a soft place to land. He had never once asked about her life outside those walls. Then, about 5 weeks ago, he started noticing things. Connie was leaving on Tuesdays and Thursdays, not by the usual time, but an hour earlier than she should, sometimes more. She always came back, but later than expected, and when she did, her coat was pulled tight around her, and her eyes were red in the way that eyes get after a long cry or a long fight against one. Her hands, when she set his evening tea on the desk, had developed a faint tremor. Then came the pay advances. $80 one week, $120 the next. Small, careful requests delivered with a downward glance and a quick apology for the inconvenience. Connie, who in 17 years had never once asked for anything she wasn't owed, who refused a Christmas bonus twice because she said it made her uncomfortable, was quietly asking for pieces of her salary before they were due. Marcus checked the household accounts. Everything was clean, not a single irregularity. Connie was not stealing from him. She never had. She never would. But something was wrong. He felt it the way he felt a bad deal before the paperwork confirmed it, a low, persistent vibration beneath the surface of ordinary days. What is she not telling me? He tried to dismiss the question. This was Connie, the woman who held his daughter while she cried for her mother. She had earned his trust 100 times over. But Marcus Ellison was not a man who made peace with uncertainty. He was a man who found answers. So on a Tuesday evening, when he looked up from his desk and saw Connie already in her coat at 4:30, bag on her shoulder, moving quietly toward the front door, he made a decision. He waited 30 seconds. Then he followed her. She walked 2 blocks to the bus stop and rode for 25 minutes, seated near the window with her hands folded in her lap and her lips moving almost imperceptibly, the way a person moves their lips when they are talking to themselves or to God, or to some private inner strength they are trying to keep alive. Marcus sat 4 rows back in his dark coat, feeling strangely conspicuous. A man used to being at the center of every room, now trying very hard to disappear into one. When she stepped off the bus, he followed her down a wide street that grew quieter as they walked. And then he saw where she was going. The Lakeview Memorial Medical Center. His chest tightened before his mind caught up. He followed her past the main entrance, around the side of the building, through a quieter door that opened into a corridor with soft lighting and muted sounds. He looked at the sign above the door. Pediatric Oncology and Hematology Unit. Marcus stopped walking. The city carried on behind him. A bus sighed past. Someone somewhere laughed on a phone. The world continued its indifferent motion. Marcus stood still. Then he walked through the door. The corridor inside smelled of antiseptic and something floral, someone's flowers from a get-well bouquet. Connie moved through it without hesitation, nodding at a nurse who recognized her, turning into a room near the end of the hall without checking the number on the door. She had been here many times. Marcus walked slowly to the doorway.
I'm right here.
The door had not closed fully behind her.
You're so strong.
Through the gap, he saw a hospital room,
I'm right
a bed,
here,
and in the bed,
I know,
a
Mom.
boy.
You're so
He
strong.
looked about
We'll get through
13 or
this.
14. He was
I'm
thin
right
in
here,
that
Mom.
particular way
I
that
know, Mom.
illness makes a
You're so
person
strong.
thin.
We'll get through
Not
this.
slight, not slender, but reduced, as if something had been quietly taken from him for a
Right
long
here, Mom.
time. An IV line ran into his left arm.
I know, Mom.
There were shadows
You're so
beneath
strong.
his
We'll get
eyes
through
that didn't
this.
belong on a young face.
I'm right here.
Connie pulled her chair
I know,
close
Mom.
to the bed
You're
and
so
took
strong.
both of
We'll
his
get through
hands in
this.
hers. She leaned in
right
and said
here.
something low and
I know,
soft.
Mom. You're so
Marcus
strong.
could
We'll get
only
through
just
this.
hear it. Baby,
I'm right here.
Auntie is here.
I know.
A nurse entered from the other side of the room. She had a tablet in her hand and the careful expression of someone delivering a message they wish they didn't have to deliver. Mrs. Okonkwo, I'm sorry to bring this up this evening, but we do still need to resolve the outstanding balance before we can schedule the next round of treatment. The words hit Marcus like a door swinging open into darkness. Outstanding balance. Next round of treatment. He stepped back from the doorway and pressed his shoulders against the wall. He stood there without moving. Through the gap in the door, he heard the boy's voice, thin and young, reaching for a brightness it didn't quite have the energy to sustain. Baby, stop worrying about that. I'm okay, I promise. Marcus looked down at his hands. His watch caught the corridor light and glinted back at him. He looked away from it. He turned and walked slowly back down the hall, out through the quiet side door and into the evening air. He found a low wall near the entrance and sat down on it. Taxis moved on the street beyond the parking lot. A family was coming out of the main doors. A father holding a bundled child, a mother carrying a bag, all of them moving quickly toward a car, away from this place, toward whatever came next. Marcus sat still. For the first time in 4 years of relentless forward motion, he did not know what the next move was. He was still sitting there 35 minutes later when footsteps approached and then stopped. He looked up. Connie was standing on the path, staring at him. Her face went through several things in rapid succession: shock, confusion, the quick inventory that a person does when they are trying to understand what they are seeing and what it means. Neither of them spoke. Then Connie's face did something he had never seen it do in 17 years of daily proximity. It cracked open, just for a second, just enough to show what was underneath, before she gathered herself with the practiced steadiness of someone who had been collecting herself for a long time. Mr. Ellison. Her voice was careful, quiet, braced. I can explain. Marcus stood up slowly. He was a tall man, and in his dark coat he looked the way he always looked in the world, composed, substantial, in charge of whatever room he occupied. But his eyes were different tonight. Connie noticed immediately. She had spent 17 years learning the small signals of this household, and she understood in an instant that the man looking at her was not angry. He was rearranged. "Rosa," he said, and then stopped. Wrong name. Old reflex from old grief. "Connie," he corrected quietly. "You don't have to explain anything, not out here." She blinked. That was not what she had expected him to say. "I thought," she started. "I know what you thought," he said. Her grip on her bag tightened just slightly. That small movement told him everything.
I'm asking for
"Can we sit somewhere?"
It's not
he
easy,
asked.
but
"Please?"
we can try.
There was a diner half a block from the hospital, the kind that exists in the orbit of every large medical center, open late because illness doesn't keep office hours and the people who love the sick need somewhere warm to wait. It had yellow lighting and vinyl booths and a laminated menu with too many options and a smell of coffee and toast that was somehow deeply comforting. Marcus held the door open. Connie walked in ahead of him. It felt strange to her. She was always the one who made way. They sat across from each other in a booth near the window. A tired waitress took their order. Marcus asked for black coffee. Connie asked for peppermint tea.
This is different.
For a moment, neither of them spoke. Rain had started, a light spring rain that tapped at the window with small, insistent fingers. Then Connie set her hands flat on the table, took a breath, and began.
Better.
"His name is Jerome. He's my nephew. He's 13 years old." Marcus listened. "His mother, my younger sister Grace, she passed away 18 months ago, a stroke. She was 38 years old. She was healthy. She was fine, and then she wasn't." Connie's voice stayed level, the levelness of someone who has told a hard story enough times to have found a way to carry it without dropping it. 7 months ago, Jerome started getting nosebleeds, frequently. He was always tired even when he'd slept. His teacher called me because he had fainted in afternoon classes. She paused. The doctors found a blood cancer, acute lymphoblastic leukemia. The word settled on the table between them. Marcus knew it. Not personally, Diane's illness had been different, but he knew what the word did to a family. He knew the weight it carried. He knew the specific way it changed every ordinary Tuesday into something you had to survive. The first phase of treatment went as well as it could, but the type Jerome has, the oncologist says it requires a more intensive approach for the next stage. More targeted, more effective, they say. But the cost... She looked down at her hands. "The insurance I have covers some, not nearly enough." "How much?" Marcus asked. Connie looked up at him. There was a long pause, the pause of someone deciding whether to show a wound. Then she said the number. Marcus did not flinch, but something in him went very quiet. The number Connie named would not have troubled a man of his means through a single moment. He had spent more than that on a single night entertaining clients. His car had cost twice that. A weekend at the firm's leadership retreat cost 3 times that, and he had approved the budget without looking up from whatever he was reading. And yet, Connie had been quietly rationing her salary, asking for small advances, stretching every dollar in every direction, trying to reach that number alone for 7 months. "You've been carrying this by yourself," Marcus said. It was not a question. "Yes," Connie said simply. "Why didn't you come to me?" Connie was quiet for a moment. She turned her teacup slowly between her palms and looked out at the rain on the window. "Because it is not your problem, Mr. Ellison." Her voice was gentle, but without apology. "You pay me a fair wage. I do my work. What happens outside these walls? That is my life, not yours." She shook her head slightly. "I am not saying it to make you feel guilty. I am telling you how I thought about it. You have your grief. I have mine. I did not want to bring mine to your door." She paused. "And I did not want you to look at me differently." "Differently how?" Marcus asked, though he already knew. "With pity," she said quietly. "I have spent my whole life being capable, being the one who handles things. I did not know how to be someone who needed handling." Marcus walked home alone that night. His driver had come. He sent him away and walked the 15 blocks back to his building through the light rain, needing the cold air and the sound of the city and the wet pavement beneath his feet. He rode the elevator to the 14th floor and stood in his living room without turning on the lights. Outside the windows, Chicago stretched out in every direction, an enormous glittering grid of lives happening simultaneously. He had looked at this view 1,000 times and seen a landscape, a context for his own success. Tonight, he saw something different. He thought about Connie at that diner table. "You pay me a fair wage. I do my work." 17 years. She had done her work and then some. She had done more than any contract had asked of her, with a consistency and a grace so quiet that he had simply absorbed it, the way a house absorbs warmth without thinking about the furnace. And while she was warming his house, her own life was cold. He walked to the kitchen, Connie's kitchen really, the one she knew better than he did, and made himself tea badly, the way people who have never had to make their own tea make tea badly. And he sat at the counter and thought about Jerome. 13 years old, an IV in his arm, wanting to be the kind of doctor who actually explains things to you. He thought about what Connie had said toward the end of their conversation in the diner as they were putting on their coats to leave. "I was going to work it out," she had said. "I always work it out." And she would have. Marcus believed that completely. Connie would have found a way. She would have stretched and scraped and carried the weight until she reached the other side, because that was who she was. But she should not have had to. Marcus left his tea half drunk on the counter and went to his desk. He opened his laptop. He didn't open his work files. He just needed something in front of him while the decision that was already made inside him found its shape. He picked up his phone and sent a message to his personal attorney. "I need to talk first thing tomorrow morning. It's important." He set the phone down. He sat in the quiet kitchen for a long time, the city pressing its light through the windows, and thought about the kind of man he wanted to be. Marcus was at his desk by 5:30 the next morning. His attorney was a meticulous, sharp-minded woman named Priscilla Obi, who had worked with him for 9 years and had a gift for understanding what he needed before he had finished explaining it. When she picked up his call at 6:15, she was always early. She heard his voice and went straight to listening mode. "I need you to contact Lakeview Memorial Medical Center, Pediatric Oncology. There is a patient there, a 13-year-old boy named Jerome Okonkwo. I need the complete cost of his recommended treatment plan, not the budget version, the full plan his doctors actually want to give him." A brief pause. "And Priscilla, I want this handled anonymously. My name stays out of it completely, for now." "Understood. I'll have numbers for you by noon." He hung up and looked out at the early sky over the lake, that particular pre-dawn shade of blue that looks like the world deciding whether to begin. He thought about Connie, who was probably already on the bus heading toward his building, who would arrive at 8 on the dot as she always did, tie on her apron, and move through his home with that steady, unhurried grace, carrying something enormous in perfect silence. He thought about how many mornings she had done exactly that. Connie arrived at 8 on the dot, as she always did. She was quieter than usual. Her movements were careful, deliberate, the movements of someone who does not know what the day is going to ask of them and is conserving themselves just in case. Marcus could see it in the set of her shoulders, the slight lowering of her eyes. She had not slept well. He was in the kitchen when she came in, making his own coffee, which stopped her just inside the doorway, because in 17 years she had never once seen him do that. "Good morning," he said. "Good morning, Mr. Ellison." She reached for her apron. "Connie," he said her name quietly. "Last night, I want you to know that nothing between us has changed. Your position here is secure. I am not looking at you differently. I need you to hear that." Connie paused with her apron half tied. She looked at him with an expression she had never seen on his face before, something suspended between relief and the careful, protected hope of someone who has been let down before and is not ready to fully believe good news. "All right," she said quietly. "All right," he repeated. She finished tying her apron. He took his coffee to his desk. The morning moved forward, ordinary on the surface, transformed underneath. Priscilla called at 11:52. Marcus closed his office door and listened as she walked him through the numbers. The treatment protocol the hospital had recommended for Jerome's next phase, a targeted immunotherapy specifically designed for his type of leukemia with significantly better long-term outcomes than the standard approach, was also significantly more expensive. The gap between what Connie's insurance covered and what the treatment actually cost was not a gap. It was a canyon. It was more than a full year of everything Connie earned. "Can we do it?" Marcus asked, though he already knew. "I can process the payment this afternoon," Priscilla said. "Do it," Marcus said. "Full payment direct to the hospital billing department. Flag it as a private charitable donation. No name attached. I'll deal with explanations later." "Done by 4, she said. He thanked her and set the phone down. He sat with his hand still resting on it for a moment. It was a strange feeling, different from the feeling of closing a major acquisition, which was sharp and cold and satisfying in a particular way. This was warmer, quieter, like something that had been wound too tight inside his chest for the past 18 hours had been permitted to ease. He picked up his phone and called his head of human capital, a thoughtful woman named Dorinda Marsh. "Dorinda," he said, "I need a full audit. Healthcare coverage across every employee category. Salaried staff, hourly workers, contract-adjacent roles, building support, drivers, everyone. I want to see exactly what we provide and exactly where the gaps are. Every tier, every clause." A brief silence. "That's going to be a significant document, Marcus." "I know. I want it by Friday." That evening, as Connie was gathering her things to leave, Marcus appeared in the hallway. "Connie." She turned. He leaned against the doorframe with his hands in his pockets, and for a moment he looked less like the man on the Forbes list and more like an ordinary person trying to find words for something that didn't have simple ones. "How is Jerome today?" he asked. 4 words. Connie went still. In 7 months of this, 7 months of hospitals and treatment schedules and payment negotiations and sleepless nights, not one person outside that hospital had asked her that question, not simply, not just to know. Something moved through her face, complicated, quiet, and deeply tired. "He had a decent day today," she said quietly, her voice careful. "He ate more than yesterday. The nurse said that's a good sign." Marcus nodded. "Good," he said. "That's good, Connie." She nodded back. She picked up her bag and moved to the door, but just before she stepped out, she paused, not turning around. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for asking." And then she was gone. Marcus stood in the hallway after the door had closed. Then he went back to his desk and opened the quarterly reports he had been neglecting for 4 days. He looked at the numbers. For the first time in his professional life, the numbers felt very small. 2 days later, Connie's phone rang while she was in the middle of cleaning the windows in the living room. She almost didn't answer. She never took personal calls during working hours, but something made her look at the screen. Lakeview Memorial Billing Services. Her stomach dropped. She pulled off one rubber glove and answered. "Mrs. Okonkwo?" The voice was businesslike, but not cold. "Yes, that's my nephew. Has something happened? Is he—" No, Jerome is fine. I'm calling about his account." A pause. The sound of a file being opened. "It appears the outstanding balance for the full treatment plan, the complete course of immunotherapy, has been cleared, as of yesterday afternoon, in full." Connie stood completely still. "I'm sorry?" she said slowly. "Can you say that again?" The woman said it again. "Cleared. In full. Anonymous donor." Connie put her free hand on the windowsill. The rubber glove was still on her left hand. She stared at it without seeing it. "Did they—" she started. "Did they leave a name?" "It was submitted as a private charitable donation. We don't have a name on file, but Jerome is fully covered, Mrs. Okonkwo. The complete treatment schedule is authorized. You don't need to worry about the financial side anymore." The call ended. Connie stood at the window for a long time. The cleaning cloth was still in her right hand. Outside, Chicago went on doing what Chicago does, moving, loud, indifferent to the enormous thing that had just happened to one woman standing on the 14th floor. She had no evidence. The hospital had said anonymous. But Connie had spent 17 years learning the rhythms of this household, and she knew how to read the small shifts in the air the way a sailor reads the wind. She set the cloth down. She walked to Marcus's office. She knocked twice on the open door. He looked up from his screen. Connie stood in the doorway with one rubber glove on and her eyes full of something she was working very hard not to let fall. "Mr. Ellison," she said. Her voice was steady, but only just. "The hospital called me." Marcus said nothing. "They said Jerome's treatment has been paid for, the full amount, by an anonymous donor." Still, Marcus said nothing, but he did not look away from her. Connie took one breath, then another. "Was it you?" she asked. Marcus looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, "Yes." One word, no qualifications around it, no business language to wrap it in and make it sound like a transaction or a write-off or a charitable tax consideration. Just yes, plain and clean the way the truth sounds when it doesn't need to be decorated. Connie stood in the doorway. Her chin moved. That small, involuntary movement, the one that happens when something rises up inside a person faster than they can contain it. She had spent so many years being the steady one, the one who held things together while others came apart. She had held Lily through nightmares. She had held Jerome through every bad night since his diagnosis. She had held herself together through all of it, quietly, without asking anyone to notice, without asking anyone to see. But something about that one word, yes, said without drama by a man who could have denied it and never been found out, broke through the wall she had spent months building around herself, brick by careful brick. She did not collapse. Connie was not a woman who collapsed, but her eyes filled, and 2 tears made their way down her face before she could stop them, and she pressed the back of her rubber-gloved hand against her mouth and looked up at the ceiling for a moment, the way people do when they are trying to recover themselves. Marcus stood up from his desk. He didn't make a speech, he didn't reach for a tissue or say something polished. He just stood up, the way you stand when something important is happening and staying seated no longer feels right. "Connie," he said quietly, "why didn't you ever tell me?" She lowered her hand from her mouth. She looked at him directly, her eyes bright and wet and steady, and she said something he would carry with him for a long time after. "Because, in this house, I am the one who takes care of things. That is my role. That is what I know how to be." She paused. "I did not know how to be the one who needed taking care of." The room was very quiet. The rain had come back, tapping softly at the windows the way it had in the diner 2 nights ago. And Marcus Ellison stood in his office and understood, perhaps, for the first time with the full weight of his comprehension, that strength and silence are not the same thing, that some people carry the heaviest loads not because no one offered to help, but because they have been so thoroughly the ones who help that they no longer know how to receive it, and that the world and men like him had been very comfortable with that arrangement for a very long time. You don't have to be only one thing in this house. Not anymore. Connie looked at him. Then she nodded, small, careful, like someone accepting a gift they're not entirely sure they deserve. "Thank you. For Jerome. I don't have words for—" "You don't need words. Just let the boy get better." Something that was almost a smile moved across Connie's face. Then she straightened up, smoothed her apron with both hands, one gloved, one not, and said, "I have windows to finish." And she walked back down the hallway. Marcus sat down at his desk. He did not open his laptop. He just sat there, looking at the rain on the glass, and for once let himself remain inside a feeling without trying to measure it or manage it or convert it into something actionable. It felt, he decided, exactly right. 3 days later, on a Saturday morning, Marcus did something he could not entirely explain to himself. He bought a puzzle. Not a decorative one, not the kind of expensive novelty item that sits in a glass cabinet and signals taste. A real one, 1,000-piece puzzle of a detailed aerial map of Chicago, every street and block rendered in fine lines, the kind of thing that would take patience and time and a particular kind of focused attention. He bought it at a small toy and game shop on North Clark Street. The owner wrapped it in brown paper. Marcus stood on the pavement outside, holding it, and felt slightly foolish. He had remembered something Connie had mentioned in the diner, almost as a side note, the kind of detail you mention when you're proud of someone and trying not to make too large a deal of it. Jerome loves puzzles. He can do 1,000 pieces in an afternoon. The nurses find it annoying because he finishes them too fast and then wants another one. He says it's the only thing that makes a hospital feel like a regular day. Marcus had filed it away in the part of his mind that filed everything, the part that never fully switched off. He took a cab to Lakeview Memorial. Connie was already there when he arrived, seated beside Jerome's bed, peeling a mandarin with the slow patience of someone who has made an art form of small, loving tasks. The room smelled of citrus and clean linen and something warm that Connie seemed to carry wherever she went. Jerome was sitting up in bed with a book in his hands. He was thin, yes, and the IV line was still there, and there was a quiet fragility about his face that didn't belong to a 13-year-old. But his eyes, when he looked up as Marcus appeared in the doorway, were sharp and alert and openly curious. The eyes of someone who was still very much himself. "Mr. Ellison?" Connie said. Mild surprise, but not unwelcoming. "I didn't know you were... I hope this is all right."
He didn't usually say things like that. He usually arrived places with the quiet assurance of a man who had confirmed every detail in advance. But here he was, standing in a doorway, holding a brown paper parcel and genuinely hoping it was all right. "Of course," Connie said. She glanced at Jerome in that silent way that said, "Be yourself." Jerome looked at the parcel. "What's that?" "Puzzle," Marcus said. 1,000 pieces. A map of the city. Jerome's face opened up immediately, not politely, but genuinely, the way a young face opens before it learns to manage its reactions. A map? Like streets and everything? Streets, neighborhoods, the lakeshore. "That's actually really cool," Jerome said. And then, with the straightforwardness of a child who does not yet see any reason to be indirect, "Do you like puzzles?" Marcus sat in the chair on the other side of the bed. "I've never done one," he said. Jerome stared at him. "Never?" "Not once." Jerome looked at his aunt, then back at Marcus. Then he said with enormous satisfaction, "Perfect. I like teaching people things." Connie pressed her hand over her mouth. Her shoulders shook. They worked on the puzzle for 2 hours. Jerome was fast and systematic, sorting the edge pieces first, building the frame, then attacking the interior by neighborhood, sorting colors, identifying landmarks, making confident predictions. "You're doing that wrong," he said at one point, watching Marcus try to force 2 pieces together. "They almost fit." "Almost isn't the same as fit. You can't decide they fit just because you want them to." Marcus set the pieces down. "That's a very wise observation for someone who is 13. Jerome shrugged. "My auntie says I think too much." "Your auntie," Marcus said, glancing at Connie, who was pretending to read a magazine, "is almost always right." Connie turned a page without looking up, but the corner of her mouth curved. An hour into the puzzle, Jerome looked up and said with the directness that Marcus was beginning to recognize as simply how he communicated, "What does your company actually do?" "Logistics technology. We build systems that help businesses figure out the most efficient way to move goods and materials from one place to another." "So, like, optimization? Finding the best path?" "Essentially, yes. That's like what I want to study. Systems, how things connect, why some networks are resilient and some collapse." He slid a piece into place with a small click of satisfaction.
I want to understand why some systems take care of people and some don't." Marcus looked at him. "That," he said after a moment, "is an extraordinarily precise description of what I've been trying to figure out for the last week." Jerome tilted his head. "Really? Really?" Jerome seemed to find this acceptable. He went back to the puzzle. When visiting hours ended, Marcus stood to leave. Jerome looked up from the half-finished map of Chicago spread across his tray table. "Come back next Saturday?" he said. It was casual, almost throwaway, but his eyes watched carefully. The eyes of a child who has lost people and knows better than to assume. Next Saturday. He meant it. Connie walked with him to the door of the room. In the corridor, she stopped. "He likes you," she said, simply. "I like him," Marcus said, also simply, also true. He walked back down the corridor toward the exit, and the city opened up around him as he stepped through the sliding doors, broad and cold and full of itself, the way Chicago always is. But Marcus moved through it differently. He walked through it like a man who was paying attention to something he had been overlooking for a very long time. The report Dorinda Marsh delivered on Friday was 51 pages long. Marcus read every page on Saturday evening after he returned from the hospital, still in his coat, coffee on Maid, the apartment dark, except for the desk lamp. He read it with the focused intensity he'd had in the early years of Ellison Logistics, when every number was personal and every decision felt like it mattered. It mattered now. The picture the report painted was not scandalous. Ellison Logistics was not a bad company. The wages were fair, the legal requirements were met. On the standard indices of employee satisfaction, they scored well. But decent, Marcus was learning, was a very low bar. The corporate staff, the people in the glass offices, the ones who flew business class and had comprehensive benefits packages, were covered comprehensively. Something went wrong, you called the company physician, you got help, you moved on. Go down the chart, through the junior employees, the operational staff, the support workers, the drivers, the building maintenance teams, the household staff contracted through affiliated arrangements, and the coverage got thin, very thin. High deductibles, limited prescriptions, gaps wide enough that a serious diagnosis could become a financial catastrophe within weeks. Connie's coverage, through a basic plan she had been paying for herself for years, was somewhere near the bottom of that chart. A plan that, when Jerome got sick, turned out to cover far less than the quiet, competent woman who trusted it had any reason to expect. Near the back of the report, in a section Dorinda had flagged with a small note, "Response rates low, employees may have been reluctant to self-disclose," Marcus found a survey. The question had been simple. Have you or a family member experienced financial hardship related to medical expenses in the past 2 years? Among employees below a certain salary threshold, nearly 40% had answered yes. 40%! Marcus set the report down. He walked to the window. The city below was doing what it always does, moving, bright, relentless, full. He thought about what Jerome had said while they were working the puzzle. I want to understand why some systems take care of people and some don't. Marcus had spent 20 years building systems. He had been very, very good at it. He had built the wrong systems. He went back to his desk and started writing. The emergency executive meeting was set for Monday morning at 8. His senior leadership team, 6 people, all sharp, all experienced, all accustomed to being the smartest people in most rooms, arrived to find Marcus already at the conference table with no presentation loaded and printed documents stacked at every seat. "Pages 28 through 34, he said when they were seated. "Take 5 minutes." He watched their faces while they read. Some were neutral, some showed the small focused frown of people doing rapid calculations. Dorinda Marsh, who had written the report, watched her colleagues read it with the quiet expression of someone waiting to see what people do when they're shown the truth. After 5 minutes, Marcus spoke. "I want to rebuild our healthcare and benefit structure from the ground up. Every tier, every category, including contracted and affiliated staff. I want comprehensive coverage, low deductibles, a strong prescription plan, and I want the gap between what our top earners receive and what our lowest paid workers receive to be dramatically, meaningfully smaller." Silence. His CFO, a rigorous, precise man named Adrian Soto, looked up. "Marcus, the cost projections on something at this scope." "I know," Marcus said. "We're looking at a significant annual—" "I know, Adrian, I've run a model." He passed a single sheet down the table. "I'm not asking whether we should do it. I'm asking you to tell me how we absorb it." Adrian picked up the sheet, studied it, said nothing, but his pen was already moving. Dorinda leaned forward. "If we're doing this, I want to propose we add an emergency hardship fund alongside it, a separate pool that employees can access when something falls through the cracks, a gap in coverage, an unexpected cost, something the system doesn't catch, a real safety net." "Yes," Marcus said. "Add it." "And extended paid family medical leave. We currently offer the legal floor if someone's child is sick." "Add it," Marcus said again. Adrian set down his pen. "The board is going to push back on the cost projections, Marcus. Hard." Marcus looked at him calmly. "Last quarter, we spent more on 2 client entertainment trips than this entire initiative would cost in a year. I approved both without a second thought." He let that sit. "If we can afford that, we can afford this." Adrian looked at him for a long moment. Then he picked up his pen again. "All right, let's build the model." The meeting ran for 3.5 hours. By the time it ended, the table was covered in open laptops and annotated pages and 4 empty coffee cups. The team had asked hard questions, the right questions, and had moved not blindly, but with the deliberate momentum of people who had been shown something true and had the courage to respond to it. As everyone filed out, Dorinda stayed behind. She said, "The person in the report, are they going to be okay?" Marcus looked out at the city beyond the conference room glass. "They're going to be fine," he said. Dorinda nodded. She picked up her copy of the report and walked out. Marcus stood alone at the window. Below him, the city moved. Buses and pedestrians and cyclists and delivery trucks, thousands of people going somewhere, carrying something, belonging to stories he would never know. He had looked at this view hundreds of times and seen a market. Today, he saw people.
Weeks passed, the kind that don't announce themselves as significant while they're happening, but that you understand later were building something that mattered. Jerome started his advanced treatment the week after Priscilla processed the payment. The new protocol was harder on his body than the earlier rounds had been. There were bad days when the light bothered him, when he didn't want to eat, when he lay very still and quiet in a way that frightened Connie in this way that she kept carefully to herself. On those days, she sat beside him and held his hand and said very little, because she had learned that on the worst days, it is not about what you say, it's about making sure a person can feel, even through the dark, that they are not alone. Marcus came every Saturday. He bought the puzzle the first time and left it there, on the shelf beside Jerome's bed, always at night. The nurses started calling it Jerome's project. A young nurse named Beverly, who worked the weekend morning shift, started staying a few extra minutes at the end of her rounds to watch the progress. Eventually, Jerome invited her to work on a section. She became a regular presence, careful and focused, fitting in pieces when her schedule allowed. "You're getting better at this," Jerome told Marcus one Saturday, about 6 weeks in. "You sound surprised," Marcus said. "I'm not surprised. I'm noting it for the record." Jerome fitted a piece into the lakeshore section with a small, satisfied click. "You still try to force things that don't fit." "Old habit," Marcus said. "In puzzles and in business?" Marcus looked at him. "Your aunt told you that?" "She didn't have to," Jerome shrugged. "You have the hands of someone who's used to making things happen on his schedule. Puzzles don't care about your schedule." Marcus looked at his hands. "No, they don't." "Neither does the body," Jerome said, in the quiet, matter-of-fact way of someone who has learned this firsthand. Then he went back to sorting pieces. Connie changed, too, in ways that were small at first and then larger. She arrived in the mornings with a slightly different quality to her step. Not dramatic, nothing you could point to, but Marcus noticed. He had gotten better at noticing. She laughed more easily, a low, warm laugh that surfaced when something genuinely amused her rather than being politely suppressed. She offered opinions when Marcus asked for them,
real ones, not diplomatic deflections. She told him his fig tree was dying because he'd been overwatering it, and that if he reduced watering by half and moved it 2 feet from the radiator, it would recover. He followed her advice. The tree recovered. Small things. The small things were the whole point. One morning, about 2 months after everything had changed, Marcus came into the kitchen to find Connie at the stove making breakfast. Not his usual minimal functional breakfast. She was making plantains with eggs and spiced tomatoes, the kind of breakfast that fills a kitchen with a smell so warm and alive it stops you in the doorway. "I hope this is all right," she said, not turning around. "Jerome mentioned last week that you said you hadn't had a real breakfast in years. He called it, and I am quoting directly, genuinely tragic." Marcus sat down at the kitchen counter. He's not wrong. Connie set the plate in front of him. She made her own tea, and they ate and drank at the counter together, talking, not about schedules or household logistics, but about Jerome's latest obsession with network theory, about the documentary he'd watched and wanted Marcus to see, and about the small chess tournament the hospital's recreation coordinator was organizing among long-term patients, and how Jerome was already strategizing. It was the most ordinary kind of conversation. It was the first real one they had ever had. On a Thursday afternoon in late spring, Marcus was in the middle of a call with investors in Singapore when his phone lit up on the desk beside him. Connie, mobile. He ended the investor call without finishing his sentence. The people on the other end would be confused. He would explain later. He picked up. "He's in remission." Her voice broke on the last word. Not quietly, not with the composed steadiness she had worn like armor for 7 months. She was crying the way a person cries when they have been holding their breath for so long that they have forgotten what it feels like to exhale. Marcus sat at his desk and said nothing for a moment, because there was nothing that would be larger than what she was feeling. Then he said, "I'll be there in 20 minutes. He was there in 16. The hospital had a rooftop garden on the 8th floor, a small, underused space with wooden benches and raised planter beds, and a waist-high railing looking out over the city. A place designed for the people inside to remember that there was a world outside. A nurse had told Connie about it months ago. She had never gone. It had felt too much like hoping, and hoping had felt dangerous when so much was still uncertain. Today, Jerome wanted to go. He was still in his hospital gown with a zip-up sweater over it, pale green, his favorite, and his IV had been disconnected for the afternoon. He walked between Connie and Marcus to the elevator with careful, deliberate steps, the steps of a body still rebuilding itself, but a spirit that had clearly gotten the news that things were going to be all right. They came out onto the rooftop into the late afternoon light. The sky over Chicago was doing something extraordinary, the kind of evening that the city produces occasionally, as if to justify everything it asks of the people who live there. Deep amber along the western edge, bleeding upward into rose and then into a darkening oceanic blue. The buildings caught the light on their glass faces and threw it back in fragments. The whole city shimmered quietly. Jerome walked to the railing. He stood there with his hands wrapped around the top bar, looking out at all of it. The skyline, the lake catching the last of the light, the grid of streets spreading in every direction. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, without turning, "Auntie, look at that." Connie came to stand beside him. She put her arm around him and he leaned into her, the lean of someone who is almost grown but still knows exactly where home is. Marcus stood a little behind them. He had been to many rooftops. He had stood on top of buildings in a dozen cities. He had looked at skylines as symbols of what he had built, what he had accumulated, how far he had come from the 2-room apartment and the second-hand laptop. He never saw a city the way he saw it tonight. He wasn't seeing a skyline. He was seeing what Connie saw when she looked at it, what Jerome saw. A place full of people carrying weight nobody else could see, going places nobody thought to follow, holding each other up in quiet corridors that the skyline knew nothing about. He followed Connie into one of those corridors. Everything that had mattered had been waiting there. Connie turned to look at him. Her eyes were dry now, but soft, softened by months of hard things, and by this moment, and by the amber light that was turning everything gold. "You followed me," she said, "because you thought I was hiding something."
"Yes," Marcus said.
She was quiet for a moment. The city hummed far below them. Jerome stayed at the railing, looking at the horizon, giving them this space without being asked to, because he was 13 and already understood more than most adults about what certain moments require. "I was hiding it," she said softly. "Every day." Marcus nodded. He understood that too. He had hidden things in his own way, behind glass walls and quarterly reports and the comfortable noise of achievement, hiding from the vulnerability of meeting people, hiding from the responsibility of truly seeing them. "You don't have to hide anymore. Not here." Connie looked at him for a long moment. Then she nodded, once, quietly, like someone accepting something they are still learning they deserve. She turned back to the view. The three of them stood on the rooftop as the sun went down over the city. The man who built a company on the principle of efficiency, having learned that he had been optimizing for the wrong things. The woman who spent 17 years being strong for everyone else, learning slowly what it meant to let someone be strong for her. And the boy who was 13 years old and already understood that some systems take care of people and some don't, and who had decided without making a speech about it that he was going to build the ones that do. Below them, the city lit up, window by window, block by block, the way it always does as day becomes night. Millions of lights, millions of lives. And Marcus Ellison felt for the first time in a very long time like one of them. Not above it, in it.